what causes pain? Well, what you eat, what you put in your mouth can profoundly impact whether or not you experience pain. So we're going to go over some of this. Food either promotes or combats or fights chronic pain. There are no neutral foods. So how does diet actually relate to pain? I'm giving you the cliff notes right here. High intake of animal foods. Animal foods contain high amounts of arachidonic acid, which I'll go into in a little bit of detail, which contribute to inflammation. And then you've got fats and oils. Fat consumption impairs circulation to your entire body, not just your heart, not just your brain, but there's a huge body of research on what it does to the spine, as well as, of course, your whole body needs blood supply, right? Every single cell. And then excess weight. Excess weight. I know a lot of you are on Carly's channel because you are wanting to achieve an ideal weight and you want to get your life back. That excess weight can produce inflammatory cytokines, which promotes chronic pain in the body. So, of course, when you adopt a nice whole food plant-based diet, low fat, high fiber, it addresses all three of these things, right? So let's look at a little bit of detail here. Saturated fats, all oils, I don't care what it is, canola oil, coconut oil, olive oil, all oils, and dietary cholesterol, which only comes in animal foods. Plants don't have a liver, so they don't make cholesterol, so it's only in animal foods. And animal foods are anything with a face or a mother, even if it swims. So eggs have cholesterol, fish has cholesterol, chicken has cholesterol, right? All of these things damage your endothelial cells, but basically they line all of your blood vessels and they do a lot of really important things. One of which is they produce nitric oxide, which is what keeps your blood vessels from constricting. It keeps them from getting too small, which increases blood pressure and damages everything, right? So it's really important your endothelial cells are healthy. Well, these things injure your endothelial cells. It's actually called endothelial dysfunction. And when you harm them, it will impact nitric oxide production, negatively impacts all your blood vessels, not just the vessels to your heart and your brain. And impaired lumbar artery circulation is seen to relate to lots of things: degenerative disc disease, back pain, all kinds of things. So it all has to do with circulation and whether or not those endothelial cells are healthy, right? So fat consumption does impair circulation in the body, and this is just a little visual here. These are red blood cells, and you can see, they need to go single file through the capillary, which is your tiniest blood vessel, in order to provide what your body needs on a cellular level. But 6 to 9 hours after a high-fat meal, this is what happens. Those red blood cells kind of get sticky. They clump together. So that's going to impair circulation. They can't get through the capillary if they're all clumped together. And it stays this way for 9 to 12 hours. This is why a lot of people will have a sudden heart attack after a Thanksgiving meal. And we're talking traditional Thanksgiving, not what Dr. John McDougall will tell you to eat, right? And this is a little visual because pictures are worth 1,000 words of fat in your blood supply. This was taken from a patient who had had a high-fat fast food meal, right? Burger and fries, bacon cheeseburger and fries, whatever it was. And doesn't this look like what happens to gravy when it sits in the fridge? It's like, oh my gosh, why would you want that in your blood supply? Here's a little visual of the lumbar arteries, and you've got your middle sacral artery as well, right? Now, there are 3 main branches to this. There's the posterior body wall, the vertebral body and the nerve root, and the posterior peritoneum. Don't let these words scare you. I'm not going to quiz you guys later, but I want you to notice what happens when it impairs to each one of these branches. So if we get impaired blood supply to the paraspinal muscles, this is what you'll experience: pain related to exercise. Now, this isn't about, you really blasted yourself and you're sore the next day. This is about, I'm exercising and oh my gosh, the pain just won't stop. It's increasing. It's not going away. But if you're someone who you've sought all kinds of help, all kinds of people, you've seen a ton of people, nobody can figure out why it hurts to exercise. This, depending on how long you've been eating a whole food plant-based diet, this might be something that still needs to resolve in your body, right? And then it also shows failure to remove waste products. So you might get a lot more lactic acid buildup than the average person. And then the muscle can actually waste away and shrink if there's a lack of blood supply, or I shouldn't say lack, impaired. And then what happens if it happens to the bones or the nerve roots around the spine? You'll get this dull, constant pain. You get this inactivity. Stasis means there's no activity going on, right? And some swelling happening around the bones, bone sclerosis, end plate sclerosis, disc degeneration. All of this because of lack of blood supply to the bone. And then what about impaired blood supply to the nerve root? Sciatic pain, radicular pain. There's a lot of other reasons you can have this. But if nobody can find a reason, this might be it. I don't know any doctor who's requesting imaging your lumbar arteries when you're complaining of low back pain, right? It's not something that a doctor tends to want to look at or has any knowledge of. So it probably mostly goes unknown, right? And then we've got your posterior peritoneum, lack of or impaired blood supply. And that's where you're going to get pain along the sides of the low back, and then related to these particular muscles, the psoas and the quadratum lumborum. And here's a picture of those if you're curious about where they are and what they do. It's kind of like your hip hiker. And then your psoas is your hip flexor, which also has to lengthen and stabilize you when you're standing upright, especially when you're bending backward. So if you get back pain when you've been sitting for a while and you stand up, this muscle more than likely is not happy. Now, this muscle can be unhappy and have lots of blood supply. So just so you know, just because you have pain here, it doesn't mean you've got impaired blood supply. I'm just sharing this information in case you happen to be one of those people who nobody can figure it out. You stretch your psoas, you've done fascial work, you've done everything under the sun, acupuncture, chiropractic, whatever, and nothing's resolving it. Well, maybe it's time to think about blood supply or changing to a whole food plant-based diet, low fat, high fiber, right? So moving on to inflammation. The Stanford University School of Medicine did a study to determine what was the primary cause of joint damage, osteoarthritis, right? Or rheumatoid arthritis, but osteoarthritis is more common. And what they determined was it had nothing to do with compression or wear and tear or old age. So yay, that's good news, right? It's chronic inflammation. So if we can figure out what's causing the chronic inflammation, we can pretty much prevent experiencing joint damage. That's pretty cool, I think anyway. I love to have power put back in my hands. So here's half the population in this world, this country, and most of the Western countries, not the other countries. They don't experience what we experience until we start to put our fast food chains in their countries. But half the population develops degenerative joint disease or osteoarthritis. And it is the leading cause of chronic disability in this country alone and a lot of Western countries. So let's look at a little bit of what food has to do with chronic inflammation, because that's what we're talking about here, right? There is something called arachidonic acid, and it does contribute to inflammation because it stimulates the production of those pro-inflammatory chemicals in the body, which means it promotes inflammation in the body. So it would seem to me we would kind of want to minimize arachidonic acid intake if that's the case. When you get too much of it, the body over-responds with that inflammatory process. Now, your body's constantly healing and repairing all the time on a cellular level. But it shunts itself. It turns it off, intermittently. But if you've got a lot of arachidonic acid in the body, guess what? It doesn't really shunt. It doesn't reverse. It doesn't turn off. It just kind of gets stuck on like a brick on the gas pedal. And so here are the sources in our food: animal meats, oily fish. I put this like salmon because the whole world thinks salmon is a health food because of all those omega-3s. But it has just as much cholesterol and it has a lot of fat. Salmon's a very high fat food. You'd be shocked at how high fat it is. If you're trying to lose weight, it is not your friend. And these things will produce the highest amounts of arachidonic acid in the body. Plants, fruits, veggies, grains, legumes, beans, lentils produce little or no arachidonic acid. And then, of course, processed baked goods produce a moderate amount. No matter what side of the food fence you sit on, if you're keto, if you're vegan, guess what? You'll both agree that donuts are not a health food. So let's start where we agree and have a conversation, right?
Thanks so much, Eileen.
You're welcome.
Bye now.
Bye, everybody.